So I'm always going to look at it because there's new ways of thinking, there's new technologies, there's new information that comes, and we want to be able to adjust and iterate on that.
My name is Matt Reiner, managing partner at Capital Investment Advisors, CEO of Wellness Strategies, an author, podcast host, and also a speaker to the wealth management community. My mission is to help every family in this country have access and be served by a human financial advisor. That we all have to live in the moment and not try to force progress too quickly. Let it happen and commit to a long-term strategy in your life, in your business, and in your investment portfolio.
And now, your host, my dad, Matt Reiner.
All right, here we are, another episode of the Future Proof Advisor podcast. Thanks for joining, and we're continuing our conversation around communication, something so integral in the business that we do. And that spurred a question as I was going through this research of which comes first, the question or the problem? The question or the problem? To be curious means we have more questions than answers, and with each answer comes more questions. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg. Does the question or the problem come first? And it's something that I wanted to explore because ultimately, in great conversation, it's about asking great questions, asking relevant questions, actively listening that lead to asking questions. It's a combination. Conversation is not just one thing. It's multitude of things all happening in real time that we have to be very much aware of and cognizant of to be able to continue to do. And in a world where access to information is easier than ever, we have found ourselves more prone to getting, quote, the answer as opposed to exploring the possibilities. We've got to get the answer so we can move on. We've got to get the answer to show we are valuable. We've got to get the answer to prove we are smart, that we are worthy. That's what we learned in school, right? We have to get the answer, which keeps us and hinders our ability to ask the questions. We are looked at in our world, and we have this wrongful belief that we are meant to be, when asked a question, to have the answer. When told to do something, we have the answer. That if we ask the question, we're looked at not as being as capable to do it, but rather it looks as a weakness to ask questions and a strength to know the answers. Whereas it's the exact opposite. That asking questions is a strength. The skill of asking a question has been lost. It is one of those unintended negative consequences of the great advancements of technology. I do believe that finding this skill again will help us and will be the determinant of how far we move into the future, because it is a skill that needs to move alongside of the technological advancements that are happening. You know, with any advancement or any change, there are going to be unintended consequences. What technology has enabled us and empowered us and allowed us to do is far greater than the unintended consequences. But that doesn't mean that there are no unintended consequences. There are, and this is one of them. Technology and access to information, our ability just to go Google and get an answer and move on, keeps us from asking questions. And some could say, well, I asked Google the question. But is that really the root of it, just getting to the answer? Why is that the answer? Where did that come from? What is the source? Which is a very difficult question for a lot of people to ask these days. I just had the answer. It aligns with what I want. So I'm now able to move forward. So that's what we are going to explore today. We are going to explore the idea of moving from facts to feelings. We're going to talk about how lowering the feeling of asking questions as being probing. We're going to talk about a way and a strategy to do that, how to use vulnerability and connection to dive deeper and explore together. We're going to talk about the best way to ensure you are aligned with what you're saying, and that will then allow for us to ask more questions, because too often we assume the intent or the information of what someone said, and we assume incorrectly, and then we talk on different paths, and it causes challenges. And then finally, we're going to talk about 2 tactics to help us ask more questions and to get deeper answers out of those that we are conversing with. Before we do, I want to think about travel for a moment. When we travel to new places, we tend to gain new perspectives. We find ourselves present as we're taking in, new sights, smells, new places, new tastes. We're taking all this in, and with the exploration of those new surroundings, we start to get comfortable with it. We start to understand it. We venture down streets. We venture to new restaurants. We venture to new landmarks. And we quench our curiosity for this new location or this new area through exploration, through going, through acting, through doing within this new environment, right? It's not that we just accept it, we explore it. That's how we travel. That's how we go and learn. Exploration, what is so great about experiences and exploration is that it creates, intrigue and unique perspectives, because we all have our own perspectives. And now this new information builds on the information we had and creates something new for us as we move forward in the world, right? Within relationships, and what we talked about like in our last podcast about active listening, is that within relationships, each conversation is a new adventure, which should be explored. It should be approached in the same way that we approach going and traveling to a new location. Within a conversation, questions act as our tool to gain new perspectives that is similar to our personal adventures. I think of it as like exploration is the activity equivalent of asking questions in a conversation. Exploration is the activity that we do when we travel that helps us to explore, to learn, to gain comfort, to understand, to create new knowledge and information. Questions, asking questions in a conversation, allows us to explore, gain new information, gain new insights, create better understanding going forward. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. Technology and access to information and how fast we can get it, right? And we have so much going on in our world that we will always want to try to find efficiencies and shortcuts. Technology has created this speed to where the world expects us to have the answers so much faster, and that is the way forward, that you must have the answers and then you can be valuable. But you think about it, right? And it's hard to put ourselves, especially some of those that have grown up in a technological world. But prior to the internet and during the times where information wasn't easily accessible, the only way to gain information was ask questions. Well, what is Bob doing over there on the other side of town? How's the crop coming? What do you think the weather is outside if someone was already outside? That's how we gained information, was asking questions. And in order to get the insight that was necessary to help us move forward was that we became really good at asking questions. But now, because we have access to information, why do we need to ask questions to anybody else? We just go and get the information. And the difference between now and then points to technological innovation, and that's true. But the question we must ask is, why has technology created less personal connection? And the one thing that seemingly stands out is the lack of curiosity and exploration. We just go for the answer. Curiosity and exploration, that's dealt with and found and explored through questions. So what we must do, and this is the first area to look into, is that we need to move from asking about facts to asking to get to the root of feelings. Facts are not as impactful in a conversation as feelings. Facts are dead ends. Facts are dead ends. What is the weather? It's hot. What do I go after with that? There's no conversation continuation of that, right? That is a dead end. I asked the question, they gave me a fact, it's hot, and then I led to a dead end with the conversation. Whereas connection happens through emotion. I can say, instead of saying it's what's the weather, you can say, how are you feeling about outside? Or how's the weather outside impacting what you want to do? Oh, well, it's so hot that I can't go out to my garden. I got to go work on my garden. I got to go help with it, but it's so hot I can't spend time doing that. Wow. That, just changing the conversation, I got the answer I wanted, that it's hot, but I got more insight about that individual. They like to garden. They really love to be out in the yard. Now I can go and say, well, what are you gardening? Oh, well, I've got this beautiful tomato plant. I've got sunflowers. I got all. Now I'm starting to create connection. I'm starting to create this connection with this other individual by asking a question that's so commonly asked, what's the weather like? Or, the weather outside's so hot, isn't it? Yes. Okay. Now I'm creating connection. And that is the ability of trying to get to feelings as opposed to facts. Feelings. How is the weather outside impacting what you want to do? Well, it's not allowing me to go garden. It's not allowing me to do an action. I can see it in my tone because I'm active listening, that it's something that's hurting them. And now I have a better understanding, right? I think that the analogy I like to think about is like a tree being green doesn't mean much to me, right? That tree is green. That doesn't do much for me. That tells me a fact. It doesn't do much for me. But a tree giving me shade makes me feel something. Facts mean less than feelings. If that tree is giving me shade, I feel something. If that tree is just green, it doesn't mean anything to me. Asking others about facts is like knowing that the tree is green. Asking others about how they feel about something, factual, equates to gaining shade from a tree. It creates a feeling. So here's some examples. Let me share this on the screen with you of some examples of facts versus feelings and questions that we tend to use today, right? So the question for facts would be, where do you live? Taking that same question and going deeper to explore feelings is, what do you like about where you live? I live in Atlanta would be my factual answer to the factual question. What do you like about where you live? Oh, I love the food culture. I love the walkability of my neighborhood that I live in. I think that it has access to everything, but I have the ability to live in this small little area. Wow. We just learned a lot more about that individual. Facts versus feelings. Are you married? Tends to be a question we ask. Tell me about your family. Well, I have 2 kids. I have a wife. We've been married almost 10 years. If I just said, are you married? I'd say yes. But what does that tell the other person about me? Yes, they now know I'm married, but they don't know anything else. It's a dead end, right? Where are you from? Tends to be an initial conversation starter. The other option is to get deeper is, what's the best thing about where you grew up, right? Where are you from? Marietta, Atlanta. Doesn't tell you much. But what's the best thing about where you grew up? Man, I was in a neighborhood. We used to ride our bikes all around. We would play night tag. I remember playing football in my buddy's yard right up and down. It's down a hill. We'd run downhill. Growing up was amazing. We had this small little neighborhood feel. You learned so much more about me at that point in time than just knowing the fact. It's a matter of as asking about feelings, changing your questions to be about feelings as opposed to being about facts. That is very key. The next thing is that one of the challenges with asking questions is it can become like it's like this interview. It's like we're like probing them with all these questions, and it feels like awkward. Like we're not connecting with them. And it also sometimes feels like you're trying to find something out on them and shame them or exploit them. And so the way that we can get over this, and there's this concept of street epistemology that does a really great job of this, is that we can start to ask for permission. We assume that the other person understands our intent, that we're just doing it to explore, because that's what everybody's listening to the Future Proof Advisor podcast, and they know we should explore. So everybody knows that, but they don't. It's taken differently by different people. And so what the concept is that you ask for permission. You say, do you mind, are you okay if I explore this a little bit deeper? And if they say yes, then, you can say that. And you can say, I'm not here to shame. I just really want to understand where you're coming from so that I can better, connect and lead together or go and do X, Y, Z together. And then if they say yes, then now you can ask questions and it's more comfortable. And you're able to then go deeper into what we're doing. And I feel that this idea of asking for permission, which is something that we did as kids for so long. We grew up having to ask for permission. Can I go to the bathroom? Can I do this? Can I do X? And we now got older. We got this freedom from asking for permission that we feel that it's always assumed that we have been grandfathered in, or because of our age, we are not permission askers anymore. So we shouldn't ask for it. But in reality, in conversation, to explore, we must let them know we want to explore it, not to make them look bad, but just we want to connect deeper with them. And street epistemology, if you look it up on YouTube, it's super interesting. I can put some links in the podcast notes. Is that street epistemology is this guy that's going around just to talk about, helping other people understand their own views. He's not there to convince them. He's asking questions to help them, the individual that's getting questions asked, to understand and question their own beliefs, not to try to convince them, but to help them understand, where does it come from? Why do I believe in something? Why do I have this belief? And he asked for permission before ever doing it. Do you mind if we explore why you X, Y, Z? And it makes the conversation, allows it to be more comfortable, allows it to be more open-minded, and allows for us to explore. And so in any conversation, we should use exploration or permission to be able to explore a little bit further. Next, it's a matter of repeating back what you hear to ensure clarity and alignment, right? Because we all come from different backgrounds, we need to ensure that we take the time to say, this is what I heard, is this right? Because it's all going through different filters. Even if it's a simple thing as I am happy, it could be interpreted different by different people. And so despite us hearing the words and knowing what the words mean and knowing that when someone says it, what the intent of it means, we should repeat it back to better truly understand what a person is saying. And there's a framework that Charles Duhigg and Super Communicators talks about, which is the Fast Friends procedure, which really helps in this concept. And I want to share that here on the screen, and we'll walk through it. Is this idea that the Fast Friends process is that you start by asking a question. This then creates vulnerability. If you ask a question about feelings, it's going to create vulnerability. If you ask a question about facts, it creates no vulnerability. So we ask a question about feelings. We then get vulnerability. This then triggers vulnerability on both sides. When they are vulnerable, then you then come in and provide some statement or story of vulnerability as well, which then triggers emotional contagion. Emotional contagion creates a sense of like we're on the same page. We get each other. We are very similar, which then elicits connection, which then prompts more questions. Well, tell me more. Like now I feel comfortable. They feel comfortable. We can now have more conversations. This is how we get conversations. If it's one-sided, you're not going to get this. But if you're asking questions, you're providing vulnerability, you're asking questions to better understand them so that you can relate to them, have empathy, then provide vulnerability, then you are now having this opportunity to create more connection within your conversation. So I think that that's a super interesting framework to think about. Finally, some areas to help ask more questions or get more insights from the questions that you ask. First is the power of and silence. We always think that is a bad thing, right? I think about like Loom, for instance, which is the AI video screen recorder. When you can edit it, you can edit out all of your ums in a video. Ums in videos are bad. Even if I do this on the podcast, it seems bad. It's not great. But in conversation, it actually is really good. In silence in conversation is awkward. And it makes us feel like we're doing something wrong. But it's actually one of the biggest keys to helping to uncover and allow the other person to explore what they said and expand upon what they said more and deeper, creating that vulnerability, which then allows for you to create connection, expose your own vulnerability, and ask more questions, and ultimately create that connection. You know, I think about it as like an analogy of when we're driving a race car, we don't have time to think. We just react. Boom, 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 boom. We're going so fast. When we sail a boat, we find peace and we reflect. It's there at that point where we find, depth. We're not going to kind of create the aha moment in a race car. We're like so focused on just going. When we're sailing, we're going to like have some time. Conversations create connection when they're more like sailboats. When you're not trying to just get out of the conversation and move through it. Like, okay, I asked one question, now I asked some vulnerability. It's like it's more like a sailboat. We're going to take some time. I'm going to be present. We're going to reflect. We're going to take some time to understand. I'm going to share. You're going to share. We're going to ask questions. It's not going to be one-sided. That's what it's all about. And finally, the power of a clarifying question. If you don't know a question to ask a clarifying question. We also talked about in past podcasts around the tell me more question. That's such a simple, easy one to use that creates connection. But the power of a clarifying question, don't assume that you know what was said. Even though you understand the words very deeply, don't assume. Ask a clarifying question. Well, why? What do you mean by success? Right? I want to be successful. Okay, we all know what that means, but my determination of successful is different than the person I'm talking to. And that's okay. It doesn't make one of us right or wrong. This is a conversation, exploration. So what does success mean to you? Okay, well, what do you believe you need to do that? Now I understand what success is to you, and we can have a conversation and relate based on what your definition of success is, not my definition. Because if we're talking about my definition of success and someone else's definition of success, and we're trying to have a conversation on what success is of a project, that's going to be very different. And it's going to cause the lack of connection, lack of progress, lack of understanding. And so clarifying questions are the best questions to ask so that we can get to the root of it. And then you can respond back, this is what I hear, right? And we're starting to use all of these different tools to create connection. Conversation is hard. We're doing 3 podcasts on conversation because it's so hard. But in our industry, it's so important, both to get our team to progress and both to connect with our clients and our families. And in order to future-proof our firm in the future, as we go forward, connection and the human element is what's key. And if you don't create deep-rooted connections that are based on depth, not surface, it's going to be harder to create a moat in your business as everything goes forward. And so there is a power in asking questions. The power extends beyond the initial act, right? Asking the right question is important, but the value comes from hearing and also understanding the answer. And it's the act of a great question is more than just the question itself. It's a relevant question. It's a question based on what you're hearing, not just like a list of questions and going through them like an interviewer, right? There's depth in it. And I always think about this, and like life is a circular journey, right? Life is a circular journey. You're born, you grow up, you birth more humans, you then parent, and finally you parent those that birthed you, right? It's a circular journey, and it's a continuous cycle, which then begs the question, like, what is the beginning? Where is the beginning of that cycle? Connection is spurred from having a deep understanding. Connection is about having a deep understanding that comes from exploring feelings over facts. The feelings behind the beliefs, the feelings behind the statements, the feelings behind the values that you have. Exploring feelings over facts requires comfort and safety in the relationship. In order to get to comfort and safety, you have to explore. You have to ask questions. You have to have active listening, right? Which then begs the question, what is the first step to create a connected relationship? And I believe, from my connected experiences, I've had lots of conversations that were just surface level and didn't get much out of it. And I've had a lot of deep connected conversations with individuals. And the difference that I have found is that it starts with a thoughtful and relevant and vulnerable question. Questions is the start of a connected relationship. And it's not questions to help serve your purpose. It's questions to help understand who you're talking to. And there is a difference. So I challenge you for the next, 3 conversations you have. Start them with a question more geared towards getting to their feelings, not a factual response. So using that facts and feelings conversation that we just had, ask a question, not what is the weather? How does the weather outside make you feel today? What does it mean to you? What does it avoid keeping you from doing? And use these questions to best understand the fact and feelings to better your connection. So as we've done on the last couple podcasts, I want to ask one question that we're going to take all this data and share it with everybody and learn more. But it's all anonymous, and it's just to help us understand. It's all about asking questions. And so I want to ask, how would you rate yourself on the following statement? In a conversation, I tend to ask more questions than I do make statements. How do you rate yourself? We'll put the link in the podcast notes. Go in and answer it. And I hope that you found something, just one little tidbit that'll make you better at conversations from this podcast today and hope to future-proof you into the future. So I appreciate you taking time to listen today and join us on the Future Proof Advisor podcast. And stay well.